What's going on, everybody? Welcome in to another episode of Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast. He's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. We are back, a week hiatus of letting it kind of soak in after losing the NFC Championship game to the San Francisco 49ers after being up 24-7 at the half. I thought we had it in the bag. I really did. Shame on me. I was counting chickens before they hatched. But Scott, my man, how are you? Been a week?
I'm doing well. How are you? Back from Mobile? Tell everybody about your experience.
Yeah, no, look, it was great. It's always a great experience. It's great talking with scouts. It's great talking with people like ourselves in the media and people that do podcasts and radio and just getting to talk with the players. It's just a great atmosphere down there in Mobile. The weather was perfect. It was the best weather that I have had down there. Every single year, it always rains at least one day or part of a day. And this one, not a single rain cloud, nothing. It was sunshine. I got sunburn, still kind of sunburned, as you can probably tell. And it was great. It was a great time down there. It was great being able to watch the game down there at the bar with my buddy Nick Faber of the Honolulu Blue. So shout out to him and his podcast. But it was great. It was a great experience. And I'm happy to be back, though. It's nothing like being home in your own studio, getting ready to go, or own family room, whatever. But it's great. I'm excited. And we were talking before the show. I don't know, guys, if we really want to get into detail about the NFC title game. I think we've done that to a great detail and extent here on the podcast, as far as just on the network in itself.
Yeah, so other people have handled, what happened in that game. So we don't really. It's off season time. So
draft mode.
We're just going to kind of move past what happened. Obviously, still, it doesn't take away from how great the season was, but we're now in off-season mode.
Yeah.
So we're gonna get moving in that direction. I think this is where this is gonna be a really interesting draft. It's really top heavy, and I don't know if there's some COVID kind of stuff still lingering into like rounds 6 and 7 in this, maybe 5, 6, and 7 in this draft is just going to be strange.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of, there's not a lot of back end talent in the draft, but in round 1, man, I don't remember. This is going to be a good one. It's going to be a really interesting draft. There's between the offensive line, the tackles, the wide receivers, obviously all the quarterbacks up top. It's going to be a wild, first night of the draft. We'll see, obviously down the road, we'll see how it goes, but we're moving on to the off season. And, I wish we were doing one more preview, but we can only control what we can control.
100%. No. And look, I as great as being in the Super Bowl, I would be on pins and needles every single day. For the last 2 weeks, just thinking about where the Lions where they were to where they've gone. And it was a great season, 12 wins, division title, 2 playoff games, NFC title game. I mean, you can't draw it up any better. And now we know what the expectation is with this group. And as long as this group stays together of Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and the coordinators of Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn and Jared Goff, and if all of those things stay together, the expectation is division or bust. And playoff win or bust. And if you lose in the second round of the playoffs, guys, so be it. It is what it is. As long as they continue to give us the success that we're seeing now, we're good. No doubt, I want a Super Bowl, but it's hard to win in the playoffs. And what they did this year is just remarkable. And maybe it's luck, maybe it's skill. It is what it is. But we now have to focus on the offseason because we've got 20 unrestricted free agents. We've got 32 total free agents on our talent pool in the roster of Detroit. That's with exclusive right free agents, restricted free agents. The exclusive rights guys are more so like practice squad guys and those types of things. But just an interesting structure to the roster. And that's really what today's show is going to be about, is looking at the overall structure of the roster, setting the table for key positions that we want to highlight during the draft. And we're going to talk about all the positions during the draft, probably outside of quarterback, I would assume. But we want to set the kind of the table, and that will shift into what we want to focus on when it comes to the combine, draft preview, and free agency. And I think we'll get through a lot of great stuff tonight and for the weeks ahead until we get to the draft. Because Scott and I, that's how we met. We're draft guys. Like, that's just we love the draft, and a lot of that is because of the Lions' unsuccessful seasons in the past. Like, that's why we found
it, because they were always picking so early. It was exciting. It was cool. Yeah.
It was our Super Bowl, and now it's like, this is just a different spin, and I've never had to do this, and neither one of us have had to do it from a successful standpoint. So just kind of looking at like unrestricted free agents, they've got 20 on there, and I'm not going to name them all, but Lions social media pages dropped them about 30 minutes ago here on a Wednesday night of a list of players, and that's what we're going off of. So you can check it out at DetroitLions.com. But 20 unrestricted free agents. This list includes C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Graham Glasgow, Jonah Jackson, Jalen Reeves-Maybin, Josh Reynolds. But we know we're not bringing all these guys back. I mean, Teddy Bridgewater's not coming back. He's retired. But I mean, out of the list of guys that you're seeing, who are some guys that you feel like aren't going to be back, and who are guys that you feel like we need to bring back?
So I mean, it's the premier player for where the roster is Graham Glasgow, to me. And, because of his positional versatility, he was really good as a guard this year. The Ragnow stuff is, the injuries they're wreaking havoc on his body, and it's just a matter of, how much longer can he continue to do this kind of stuff? But having a guy like Glasgow in the mix to start as a guard for you, while also being capable enough to play as your backup center and give you, adequate play, is going to be important, because it's possible there's, Jonah Jackson's another guy who I don't know what to expect, but it's possible the Lions have to replace, in an awful scenario, 2 guards in the draft, where, if Glasgow plays to a point where somebody really wants to pay him, and you could understand that he played to a pretty high level this year. It's just a matter of, does he want to stay here? Does he want to still be here? I think you can replace a guard. I think that, and in this particular draft, pick a round. You can find a stud in just about every round. And there's some small school guys. There's some big name dudes. There's some conventional ways to do it. There's unconventional ways to do it. It's probably the way I would go about it. If a player like, I'm probably jumping the shark. I'm going too far ahead, but if a player like Kingsley Suamataia, I know I'm not saying it right, but if he's there in round 1, and you take it and you play him as a guard in between Sewell and Ragnow, or you play him, or you let him play on the left side where Jonah Jackson played, I think that guy gives you so much physicality and so much playmaking, athleticism, while being a huge guy. That would intrigue me greatly, but I also understand that that's not a great use of resources. But I only bring it up because we just don't know what's going to happen with Glasgow and Jonah Jackson. So the 2 guards kind of, to me, stand out. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson Jr. to me is, I don't know what your vibe is with him. Would you want to bring him back? I mean, I like the edge he provides. I think there's some redundancy with what they already have.
Yeah.
Although I would think it would be great for him to come back. And then there's Josh Reynolds on that list, and it's an important position, in the number 3 receiver position. This is a great draft. If you need a receiver, this is a great draft to need one. Dan Skipper, swing tackle. You mentioned it before. Tell him, I mean, you have your own feelings about him. It's funny, but it's super spot on.
Yeah.
And then Jalen Reeves-Maybin, I think, has emerged as their coverage linebacker, And I think it's a priority they get him signed, which
100%.
is crazy to think about. But I think it's a priority they sign him. Nothing crazy, but he's carved out a role, and I think he played to a level where they should bring him back. What are your thoughts on some of those guys and maybe other names I didn't bring up?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of guys because like Anthony Ferkser, I don't think he's coming back. Jake McQuaid, I don't think he's coming back. Vaitai, he's not coming back. He's done. Badgley, we'll see what happens there. Emmanuel Mosley, I'd be surprised if he came back. If he did, it's a 1-year deal. So like,
yeah,
Kindle Vildor and Emmanuel Mosley, if they come back, they're 1-year deals. I would be surprised if there's anything further. Matt Nelson, again, 1-year deal, but you can move on with that because he was nothing more than a depth piece, a swing tackle, and a special teamer. And you can find those later in the draft or as a UDFA. I mean, they have success finding some of these guys, but I'm with you. Glasgow and Jonah Jackson are the cream of the crop for them on the top of the list. And then I would say Josh Reynolds after that, just simply because you lose those 3 guys, who knows what your offense does after that, because you lose 2 starting guards and a guy that outside of the 2 drops in the NFC title game was pretty spot on this year for a number 3 receiver. Yeah. And he's done a really good job kind of reemerging in the NFL and resurging his career in a sense. So I would think Reynolds will be back, and I would think it would be on a relatively cheap deal. But again, it's hard to say what these guys are looking for in personal interest, and ultimately the dollar value. What do they think they're worth? I mean, I might say he's only worth $5 million a year, but he might think he's worth $8 million, and he might get $8 million a year from some team. I doubt it, but he might,
Yeah, I mean, it's the unknown of where we are. What's interesting is the number of drops. As reliable as he is in the regular season, it is super fascinating to look at his drop rate in the playoffs.
Yeah,
it really is, and it's like you want to crush a guy or any of that stuff, and then I think there was a little bit of what Dan Campbell alluded to, just being able to cut ties from players that you have an emotional investment with. Yeah. And they should have an emotional investment with Reynolds, because not only did he resurrect his career, but he really helped Jared Goff in a time where Goff was not playing well.
Yeah.
And Goff needed help, and Reynolds gave that to him.
Yeah.
So, acknowledging what Reynolds was capable of doing, what he did here, while also understanding that maybe I like Reynolds. I think he's a good number 3. Yeah. I wonder if it's just time, where maybe they part ways, and then you look in the draft, right? And there's a bunch of players in the draft. We'll get to those. We'll get to those guys shortly, but yeah. So I mean, I think that's the positions that if we just look at kind of both sides of the ball, to me on offense, it's offensive line, and then filling in, potential spots where if Reynolds leaves, then all right, well then you need to draft a receiver, and I know that there are players that we're going to like in this class. So it's O-line and receiver, and then I think on defense, it's just about everything. You could use another interior guy. You definitely need an edge player.
Yep.
You definitely need a corner or 2.
Yeah.
I don't know that you need safeties at this point. We don't know what's going on with Derek Barnes. So, I could see them trying to find somebody maybe in, say, round, the later part of the draft, as a depth player. But to me, it's, corners and pass rushers are where I would think they would be spending a lot of their time looking, when it comes to, evaluating players.
Yeah, no, and I'm with you. And to kind of circle back to Josh Reynolds, his market value on SpotRack.com is $7 million per year. So they're estimating that he's probably going to get about a 2-year deal at $14 million. Some comparable deals. Marquez Valdez-Scantling's got a 3-year deal at $30 million. Tim Patrick's got a 3-year deal at $34 million. I kind of like the Devontae Parker one at 2 years, $10.8 million. So, I mean, if you can give him a Devontae Parker type deal, I think that would be great. Cedric Wilson, even, which is a $7.3 million cap hit, average salary at 3 years, $22 million. So, from a production standpoint, he's right in line with those types of guys, and that's where those numbers come from. So, 28-year-old receiver, you bring him back on a 2-3 year deal, I think it's okay. Obviously, if you give him one, that's fine. But if they don't bring him back, I think it pushes the need for wide receiver up the board a little bit. But we know that this team works a little bit differently. They don't go off of just need and guys like myself and the media and you, what we're talking about. They go off of what they feel is a good football player that is going to help them. So I think they'll value Josh Reynolds. I think they'll value Glasgow. I think Glasgow will be back. I don't know about Jonah Jackson. I think Gardner Johnson will be back, to be completely honest, just simply because he's adopted kind of the identity of the team and of the city, and I think he likes it here. I really think he does, and he has struggled to find a fit in the NFL, and I think he gels with this team. I don't know what type of deal he gets, but when you're moving on from a Charles Harris, a Will Harris, a Vaitai, you're going to clear up some cap space. Yeah. Romeo Cora, he's out. I'd be surprised if he came back. Again, Dan Skipper.
Have some money. They'll be able to do some things, but they definitely have some in-house players that are, to me, should be first and foremost before we even look outside. We need to take care of this.
Yeah,
the players are here and deserve to be paid. So
yeah. And as you mentioned, Dan Skipper, that's going to be the Don Muhlbach of this team. He is going to get 1 year deal after 1 year deal, and he's going to be a part of this thing for a while, just chipping away until he doesn't want to anymore. But the restricted free agents are Scott Daly, Khalil Dorsey, Jerry Jacobs, Benito Jones, Anthony Pittman, and Brock Wright. I think 3 of those guys will be back for sure. Brock Wright, Benito Jones, and either Dorsey or Jacobs. I think all three of those will come back. Benito Jones should be back. He's a great depth piece. Brock Wright has earned another contract here as a backup tight end. Yeah. So they've got exclusive right free agents with James Houston, Zonovan Knight, Chase Lucas, Craig Reynolds, and Shane Zylstra. So I think Reynolds will be back. I think even Chase Lucas will be back. You would hope James Houston's back. I don't understand the whole exclusive rights thing. So my fault, folks. I don't.
I think that has to do with the fact that those guys were cut.
Okay.
And then came back and re-signed. So those aren't like, they're not still on their rookie deals. So they're not unrestricted where they can go out and get
the Lions get first.
Yes.
Try
the Lions can cut them or move on from them. And then, they can go sell themselves elsewhere.
Well, James Houston would be an interesting one because it sure does not feel like he's coming back. I'm going to be honest. Like, I don't know if he's coming back.
I hope he is. I really do.
I hope so, but
the broken leg just, I mean, it just imploded the season.
Yeah.
I don't love what they, I don't love dropping him off into coverage and running him down, with running backs on wheel routes. I don't love that, but that's neither here nor there. We'll move on, but I think I hope he comes back. I really do. Because they need a player like that who's just an assassin. Where, he gave you 8.5 sacks 2 years ago. I think it was 8.5, and man, that was such a boost for their defense when they really needed it. We'll see.
I would love to see him back, but just listening to Holmes and Campbell and some of the things that they've kind of said, I'm trying to read between the lines, and it did not sound a few weeks ago like he was close to coming back or that he was preparing himself the correct way to come back.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but we'll see. I hope he's back. And again, maybe it's a 1 year deal. Maybe it's a 2 year deal. We'll see how that goes. But to kind of put a bow on the roster structure, sitting here right now, if the draft was tomorrow or if free agency was tomorrow, the biggest needs are corner, interior offensive line, wide receiver, and defensive end. I think we can all agree there, right? Like if they can somehow with their 7 draft picks and the cap space that they have, if they can find a way to kind of put it together with those guys or those positions, I think they would be trending in the right direction. Am I wrong in thinking that?
No, and I would, even if a player like, let's say Jonah Jackson decides he wants to go chase big money somewhere, as long as you bring Glasgow back, I think your offensive line looks fine.
Yeah.
And then it's, what's going on with Colby Sorsdale? Has he grown enough for them to think that he might be able to play for them at left guard? If not, that kind of pushes that need, up a little. But it's a great draft for
Yes.
you and I both like Graham Barton a lot from Duke. He would be, he is your kind of your extra swing player who can play inside. He could also play center. So,
yeah,
that's a player that you might prioritize in a scenario where if Glasgow walks away, you might need to look at Barton in round one just because of the versatility. But, we all need to approach this as it's a very different makeup. The roster is, I don't want to say finished. It's not finished, but this is now, you need to be picking off really good players. You know what it's like. The top of the draft in round one is all about what a player might become, or the premier receivers, that kind of stuff. But when you get into the mid-20s and the late 20s, you're getting really good football players. Mm-hmm. Those guys are going to come. They're going to come in and play, at a good level for you right away. It'll be interesting to see what happens with where they decide to go. But yeah, if free agency was tomorrow, I would hope that we would hear about Glasgow right away. We would hear, maybe they went after one of the Kansas City cornerbacks that they didn't sign. We'll see. L'Jarius Sneed in a Lions uniform would be spectacular.
Yeah, it would be great if his contract was structured very similar to Cam Sutton as well, a 3-year deal that's essentially 2 years. And I think that's the key too, is like just putting trust in Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell and this whole group on how they structure these contracts. And like, I don't believe in overspending in free agency and like, I need to sign this guy. Like, I see all these things of like photoshops of like the Lions should sign this guy. And I'm like, that's not how good football teams are built. Yeah. Like, you don't overspend in free agency and expect it to be good. The hit rate, and we talked about this on our last show, the hit rate from Brad Holmes in the draft is remarkable over a 3-year span. And what we're seeing from this team being able to draft so well is just, it's incredible. And I think it gives us the confidence as a fan base and as guys that analyze the team, this is going to be a good draft for this team just because the history has shown it. And I'm excited to dive into some of the prospects. So we'll obviously see what happens with the combine in 2 weeks. And obviously from that point on, free agency starts getting going and we'll get into that when it comes. But we're talking prospects, which means we got to talk about our final segment of the show tonight, Prospect of the Week, powered by our friends over at Restore. You guys have heard me talk about them for several weeks now, and I got to tell you about them again. Restore Hyper Wellness. Maybe you're an athlete. Maybe you got kids like myself or Scott, and they're tired and they're beat up and they're trying to, revive their body a little bit, or you're trying to get back in the gym and you're not recovering like you used to. Well, I've got a solution for you. Go check out our friends over at Restore Hyper Wellness here in Northville and Birmingham, Michigan. My son and I, we both go. My wife goes. We're in there all the time, and we get our bodies right by visiting Restore. They've got everything you need, from compressions to cryotherapy, even specialty services such as IV drip therapy. So many great things that they can offer you. You can go and get 10% off now. You can get 2 cryotherapy sessions for $30. You can save 50% on your first IV. Just tons of great things that you can do. So just go check them out and get a family member, a friend, even yourself, the service you need to restore your body. Tell them I sent you from the Detroit Lions podcast so they can get you taken care of so you can get back and doing more of what you love. Don't wait around. Go check out Restore Hyper Wellness now. You can check them out at restore.com. So prospect of the week. I'll turn it to you first because I got to put the restore graphic up. But who's the prospect you've been watching this week that's maybe caught your eye, or maybe last week, whenever it is? But who's somebody that you want to highlight tonight?
So this guy was at the Senior Bowl, and it's not because he was at the Senior Bowl. It's more of the play style and the things that he brings. And a lot of people are talking about the Missouri cornerback who missed the Senior Bowl with the core muscle injury, but the guy I'm talking about is the player who played opposite him. It's Chris Abrams-Drain. Again, SEC competition. This is tough. The problem was, so we'll get into the negatives and talk about the strengths, and then wrap it up with the big picture. He's 5'11" and 3/8. He weighed 173 pounds at the Senior Bowl. I know you were there. I know you saw him. So can a player who is slight like that live outside? Because to me, you need an outside corner. I think they're okay at the nickel corner position with what they already have on the roster. I think you need an outside corner. So you need somebody who can hold up outside. I think historically, players who are real slight like he is might have some shoulder kind of physical stuff where it's hard for them to hold up against the run. He hits though, so it's not like he's not passive. He brings it. He hits. It's interesting watching him play. He has a knack for knowing where the ball is. He doesn't necessarily have to turn his head to find the ball because he's really good at breaking up passes when he's looking away from the quarterback just by separating a receiver's hands at the catch point. He's really good at that.
Yeah.
I think he's as athletic as any quarterback is in this class. I think he can run. I think he's fast. I think he's quick. I think he's all those things. I love watching him squeeze a receiver into the boundary. I don't think enough corners do that stuff. Like, use the boundary as an extra defender. To me, he looks fiery. He's in the mix all the time. You could see him get bumped around a little bit. South Carolina, Xavier Legette, he matched up against a lot, and I would think that Legette would have kind of banged him around, and he held up pretty well against him. I was surprised by that. And, I think that in the end with him, it's simply a matter of, does his body style and his makeup, the composition of his frame, do you buy into his ability to play outside? So there's some unknowns there, but he's flashing, and I like the way he looks just in coverage, how sticky he is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I am with him. We're going to do this kind of stuff where we're going to talk for a few minutes about a player and then go back and watch more and see if, is there anything that pops. He's not quite like Emmanuel Mosley was last year, who went in the first round. I was surprised he went in the first round because he was
small,
super skinny.
Yeah.
Like, I think he was taller than Abrams-Drain and skinnier and very productive, just like Abrams-Drain is. But to me, I think he is a middle day 2, maybe, a third round kind of player. It's so early, who knows, but yeah, so that's my guy. Who you got?
Well, I like that you bring up, I call him KAD, Chris Abrams-Drain, but I mean, we got 2 third-round picks. We got a late second-round pick. So I think he's very much in the cards. And I think much of that is if they pass on the player I want to talk about, and that's Kamari Lassiter of Georgia, who I watched him early in the year, and I was just like, okay, a good player, has some physicality, but just wasn't really doing it for me at that particular time. And then I got talking to a good friend of mine and a good friend of the show, Brett Whitfield of Fantasy Points, and he's a data guy for them. And he's a great follow. Check him out. But was talking to him down at the Senior Bowl, and then we text each other every now and again about players. And he asked me about Kamari Lassiter, and he's like, I think he'd be a good fit in Detroit. And he got my brain spinning. So I've been like 4 or 5 games deep in, and I think he's absolutely right. With the cover 3 stuff, the cover 1 stuff that we do on our secondary, Kamari Lassiter does it identical to what we do defensively, but I think he would be an A+ fit here because of that. And he's super physical at 6 foot, 180 pounds. You watch on my Twitter page, I dropped a highlight of it today, but he absolutely drills Xavier Leggett, a 6'1", 220-pound receiver, and just lights him up. Perfect form tackle, and he's got it all over. Against Kentucky, he does it. Against Alabama, he does it. I mean, his form tackling is phenomenal, and I think the Lions are going to take a liking to a guy that has those run fits on the perimeter like that. Now, limited ball skills as far as, he's not like Quinyon Mitchell where he's got 46 pass deflections in a 3-year span. He's only got 14. He's only got 1 career interception. A lot of that is because he turns his head late, but if he gets to work with Dre Bly and he gets to work with Aaron Glenn, I think maybe we'll see some improvements there. His biggest issue, just coverage-wise, is once he flips his hips and he essentially face guards the receiver, he's set on that. He's not going to reopen his hips and start running back in stride. So like if a receiver is going to run a post move, he's biting on the post move. And if it's a post corner, he might give up some separation there, but he closes well. And just the ability for him to lock guys up and press man, it really stands out. He's a multi-sport athlete, was a track and field kid back in high school. His fastest 100-meter time, which is not great by any means, but his fastest 100-meter time was 12 seconds. So, I mean, he's going to run, probably in the 4.5 range, hopefully a sub 4.5 range, because again, he was younger then, but he played baseball, basketball. So like he's a dual sport athlete. I just think at 21 years of age, he just turned 21. I think back to Penei Sewell, right? When we drafted him, he was only like 20 years of age. And it's like, these are core guys. And I think Kamari Lassiter at 29, if he's there, makes a lot of sense. And I'm just going to throw a hypothetical out there as we kind of put a bow on this. But if, let's say he gets invited to Detroit for the first round, and we see this every year, a guy sits in the green room. He sits in the green room just like Brian Branch did a year ago, just like we've seen other guys. We open up the second day of the draft. Let's say the Lions move out of 29 to like pick 34, and a team like New England trades up for Michael Penix. We get pick 34, another day 2 pick in there somewhere. Patriots get their quarterback. We get to 34, and Lassiter is our guy. That screams something that Brad Holmes and the Lions would do. And I love the fit, and I've fallen in love with this player. He's going to be a top 25 player for me. And that's not because of a bias to the Lions. It's just his tape is really that damn good. So yeah, I love the player. I love the fit. And that's my prospect of the week here, powered by Restore.
So it's going to be interesting how they decide they want to resolve that position. Mm-hmm. And at this point, you trust Brad Holmes to find talent specifically at that position.
Yeah.
They need a playmaking outside corner, maybe more than they need anything. So it's, they have the 29th pick. Quinyon Mitchell it would be awesome if he fell that far, but it'd be awesome if I sprouted a bunch more hair that I don't have. Like, come on, it's not going to happen. So, it'll be super interesting to see where they end up and who they target. It'll be more about the way you're describing it. It's more about a off the field fit. Anybody they're considering in round 1, all these corners are going to be super talented athletically. They're all going to be really, elite athletes. It's just, what is their makeup? And It's not necessarily stuff that we're going to get into. But it's where the Lions are going to go. And, he would be a player that I would be excited about if they chose to go that way. Cause if you're buying into that, there's some dog there. So it's good. It's good. It's really good.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. And I'm with you. I know a lot of people are going to say, and I probably should not open this conversation, but I know a lot of fans are going to say, we have never drafted a corner this high and this, and that. And Brian Branch was more of like just a weapon more so than anything else to the secondary. And that's true. We've done things kind of more of a traditional way, building in the trenches first and taking more skilled guys offensively. But just because we haven't done that yet does not mean we won't do it here in a few months with the 29th pick. Like
there's there is no way that anybody should look at anything Brad Holmes has done and think that there's a trend. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
This is the way Brad Holmes. Well, there is, but it doesn't mean that you can eliminate some positions just because it's Brad. No, they're going to find really good football players. Period. We have 3 years of proof of that. And if anybody really wants to look at the draft, his first draft.
Yeah.
Look at the 2021 draft. It's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. I think there's a couple players on there. Jamar Jefferson that you took in round 7. Okay. But I mean,
oh yeah, that's the only guy. Yeah.
Alafonwu, I mean, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot there. So, I mean, that's where I'll leave it. I think that, there's some trust that we absolutely should have now with Holmes, and I'm interested and intrigued to see the process they take to get them to the draft, and then what happens during the draft. It's going to be fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's going to be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. This was a great episode, just setting the table. We'll start diving into some more prospects next week in a position group, and just start getting going on some draft stuff. Then obviously we'll preview the combine, and who knows, maybe we'll record the show and we'll have a kind of a live combine type of thing where the TVs are rolling and we're just kind of sitting here BSing about what times we're seeing. I've done that on previous shows, so that'd be a lot of fun. But as always, it's always great. You got anything else?
We're good. We're good.
Sweet. Well, you guys, of course, yeah, it's great to be back. You guys can rate, review, and subscribe to the Detroit Lions podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow us on Twitter or X at Russ NFL Draft, at Bischoff_Scott. He's Scott Bischoff. I'm Russ Brown. This is another episode of Bischoff and Brown right here on the Detroit Lions podcast.